Well, it's great to be back with you all, and as you can see from the thickness of the sermon, get ready. Just kidding. Trying to get myself organized again. I must confess, if this is a kind of confession, that I had planned to come back a week ago, but when Greg called me after his second Sunday and asked if I'd like him to make it 3, it was an offer I couldn't refuse. And wasn't Greg's leadership of the services amazing? Yes. Yeah. Figured I was out of a job anyway. And I sort of realized that Greg had a good thing going. There was this Lenten series happening. And I thought I could ease back into work a little more slowly. So halfway through the week, though, I started to feel a little bit better. Hence, a little bit guilty about my decision. And I thought of this place, this healing retreat center that I sometimes go to. So I signed up to spend a couple of nights there. They have healthy food, they have meditation and yoga, and a sweet environment in the woods. And I thought, this will be good for me. However, they were also doing something that weekend called a sacred grief retreat. And I was curious. We're all grieving something. I knew I was grieving about the state of the world. I was grieving about the war. I was grieving still the loss of my mother. I was even grieving about my surgery. So I thought, what's the worst thing that could happen? I'm bored in a lecture about grief when I could be in the woods. I'll just sign up for the grief retreat. Well, turns out this retreat was not boring, but it was also not a lecture. It was a sacred circle where people shared their pain and loss, sometimes in very dramatic and expressive ways. After the first session, I asked the instructor if all the sessions would be that intense. "Oh no," she said. "That's the most intense it will get." Guess what? She lied. The whole thing was extremely raw, emotional, and personal. And I thought I was there to relax. But the experience was also revealing, and it reminded me of the way Holy Week unfolds. All the mixture of human experiences, grief, humiliation. Jesus goes through betrayal, loss, exhaustion, fear. There couldn't be a more emotional week than Holy Week. It starts with an upbeat Palm Sunday parade, the entry into Jerusalem on a donkey and a colt, a humble, strange entry into the city that many scholars feel was meant to mock the triumphal Roman procession that was going on across town, to show a different kind of strength, to feature a different sort of power. Jesus enters in humility without the pomp and pageantry of the Roman army. And people were shouting, "Hosanna," which means "God save us," and waving palms and branches. And they seem to be saying, we know where the real power lies. The real power is with Jesus. Will you pray with me? Holy God, thank you for bringing us together this day. Thank you for this wonderful Palm Sunday. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable and illuminating. Amen. So many people have been demonstrating this week, waving signs and even palm branches to say, we don't agree with this regime, we want no kings. Instead, we want peace, we want compassion, we want humanity in our government. We don't want authoritarianism, power grabs, mistreatment of the downtrodden and the immigrant. We don't want mass federal agents killing civilians in the streets. We don't want unprovoked wars. We don't want violence glorified. Some people have been in the streets, and some people don't really see the benefit of these parades and singing and sign waving. So they prefer not to participate. And that's each person's choice. It's not for everyone, not at all. Yet if there's one thing I learned this weekend at the grief retreat, it's that grief needs a witness. Loss needs a witness. Jesus tells the Pharisees in Luke's gospel, if the crowd on Palm Sunday were to be silent, then even the stones would shout out. Even the stones would shout out to welcome his arrival. The stones would be the witnesses. We are called to be witnesses, along with the stones, to observe, to see what is happening in our culture, to the earth, and to our fellow human beings, to see the loss, the destruction, the abuse that is happening now, here and now. Steve Durthick went all the way to Minneapolis to see what was happening there, right, Steve? Wasn't that it? You needed to be there. You needed to be, my stone for this year says here. I need to be here, here. And he made a song about it. Jesus needed a witness when he asked the disciples to stay awake while he prayed in the garden. I am deeply grieved, even to death, he told them. Jesus was grieving. And what he asked of his disciples was to remain here and stay awake with me. But of course, they couldn't. They fell asleep 3 times. I don't know, they must have been so tired. But they couldn't stay awake and witness his grief. They couldn't do it. Peter claims he will never deny his relationship with Jesus. But standing in the courtyard outside the trial, he does so 3 times. I don't know the man, he says. When Jesus is buried in the tomb, few witnesses remain. Everyone else leaves. It is hard to be a witness for grief and loss. And sometimes it's hard to find a witness. Yet this is what Jesus asks of each of us. Jesus asks us to be at the parade, to witness what is happening in our world, to wave our palms and shout in our own way, to tell the story. Maybe he was a reluctant participant on Palm Sunday, but he was a participant nonetheless. And Palm Sunday, that procession was a political act. Yesterday, many of us shouted, "No kings." Today, Jesus enters Jerusalem and is declared a king. Later this week, he goes on trial accused of being a king. Some of us would like to separate politics from religion. I know I would, to make church a refuge from the terrible, divisive realm of political theater. But it's not that simple. Jesus' story was intertwined with the politics of his day. I had to look this up for this sermon. I don't know why. I never took political science in college. But politics is the process of making collective decisions to determine how power, resources, and status are distributed. In other words, who gets what, when, and how. Who gets what, when, and how this applies to governments, institutions like churches. Churches have politics, and even family life. It's not something we can escape or fail to take part in if we are to be faithful witnesses of Jesus' teachings. Jesus was concerned with the least of these, the poor, the marginalized, the immigrant, the refugee, the orphan, the widow, the one who couldn't fend for himself. How resources are distributed is key to Jesus' teachings about caring for each person in our society, especially those who cannot speak for themselves, who are easy targets of laws that would deny them education, health care, or equal rights. Jesus calls us to be witnesses, to stay with him during this very hard time. You know, the older I get, and I'm getting older, the more I value someone who will stay and be present, that quality of a person. Staying even when things are difficult is so important. And this is another thing I learned at the retreat. We can develop this capacity within ourselves, the ability to stay with ourselves in difficult times and through difficult emotions. We can find ways not to immediately look for the quick fix, the numbing out, or the tuning out, but to stay. And then it applies to our world. How do we stay awake to the tragedies of the world? So how will you be a witness this week? One thing we do as a church community is accompany each other through the dark and the light. We are witnesses to one another's lives, to the circumstances we go through, the challenges and the joys. Not all of us are moved to go to a parade and wave a sign or a palm, but all of us are called to take part in our own way, to find our way of responding to what we see in this world, to what we witness. I believe Jesus calls us not to deny grief and loss, because that's very much a part of life, nor to get lost in grief and loss, but to allow ourselves to enlarge our capacity to include it, to see it, to be with it, to witness it in ourselves and others, and to respond, to include in our hearts and minds all that it means to be part of this human experience, to stay with Jesus through it all, to be awake enough to take action, to speak up, and to be present, to be here with life. So when that stone is rolled away, we're still there. We're still present with Jesus. Amen. Now let's listen to some more of the story that is going to unfold. And I would encourage all of you to make an effort to attend Maundy Thursday service or Good Friday this week, to be witnesses to the story as it unfolds.
Second reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27, verses 11 through 26. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You say so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many accusations they make against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner for the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. So after they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him. "Have nothing to do with the judgment seat," his wife sent word to him. "Have nothing to do with that innocent man. For today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus who is called the Messiah?" All of them said, "Let him be crucified." Then he asked, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Then the people as a whole answered,
"His blood be on us and our children."
So he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified.